The United States has the biggest and most efficient capacity to deliver primary energy to its electric sector of any country in the world, full stop. There's no second place. China has to import gas. China even imports coal. We're totally self-sufficient. We export. We're an energy monster. We can deliver functionally an infinite supply of fuel to electric systems. The issue is whether we want to do it.
Charles Mizrahi and guests may hold assets discussed in this episode. This podcast is not investment advice and is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. You should do your own research and make your own independent decisions when considering any financial transactions.
Mark Mills is the Executive Director of the National Center for Energy Analytics. He's also a Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Mark is the author of the book, The Cloud Revolution, How the Convergence of New Technologies Will Unleash the Next Economic Boom and a Roaring 2020s. I recently spoke to Mark about the challenges and opportunities in the growing demand for electricity to power AI and data centers. Mark, thanks so much for coming on the show. I look forward to it, and I just checked my notes here. This is the third time. I think you're the only guest that ever appeared 3 times, and I don't know by chance or what have you, but it always seems to be the month of May. May 2022, May 2023, and we're off by a little, but May 2024, but close enough.
Well, the month of May is a wonderful month. At least we're not doing it in March, because then we'd be talking about the Ides of March and evoking all kinds of dark signs. It's a pleasure and honor to be back as a trifecta guest.
Yep, definitely trifecta guest. And you know why I have you? First of all, you're one of the smartest guys on the planet when it comes to energy, in all sorts of phases. And what got me most was when we first spoke back in May 2022. I was all gung ho for EVs, green energy, thinking that I knew there was something up, but everything seemed right. And I was looking at the transcript, which I'll put in I'll put it in this podcast also. You flipped me 180 degrees. You said it's not happening. We don't have enough copper. We don't have enough minerals. And I remember one thing you told me is these big, huge trucks that dig all these minerals out. What do you think they're running on? Fairy dust? And I said, geez, this guy got something here. And that changed my way of thinking.
Well, I love EVs, as I told you 2 years ago. And I think what Elon Musk has accomplished is astonishing. There's a lot of credit. I mean, nobody's made a car company at that scale succeed, and you cannot explain it away with subsidies. It was a great idea. He started pre-subsidy, as you know. So what I was pushing back against then, and I still push back against ever since and long before, is this silly vision that EVs were going to quickly replace all internal combustion engines, and that they'd be inevitably far cheaper, far better. They're exciting. They have lots of features. There'll be millions more EVs in the market, tens of millions more, but it's not going to move the meter on moving us off oil. It's not going to replace all vehicles for a whole lot of just practical, engineering 101, physics reasons, ranging from digging up the copper that we need. And that's the least of it. You got to make the things with stuff. They take a lot of stuff. They take more stuff to make than regular cars by a lot, not like 10%, like 1,000% more minerals that are hard to get. But it takes an infrastructure that's really different. So we didn't talk about this at the time. What I was pushing back on that time was the fact that's demonstrable. And since the world, the clickbait world has since discovered this as well, but anybody who was serious knew this. We were not then, and we are not now mining enough minerals. I don't mean lithium. Lithium's easy, but it's copper, nickel, manganese. We're not making enough of that stuff fast enough to make an all EV future possible in a decade. Maybe one day, but not in a decade, which is what I was pointing out. But that even if you stipulated a magic battery were invented tomorrow that didn't need copper, just unobtainium, the perfect battery. The problem we've got is another one, which is the equivalent of building the infrastructure to fuel today's cars with pipes, trucks, pumps, and tanks. You need wires, transformers, transmission lines, control systems, the electrical distribution system to get the energy to the cars for an equal amount of energy of the liquid distribution system to get oil to the cars. The electrical system is far more expensive. In fact, the numbers, we're going to be publishing a study on this on Monday. The infrastructure costs, not the power plants, not the cars, not the chargers that Tesla makes, but the distribution infrastructure to get the electricity to the chargers will cost something like $2 to $4 trillion to build to deliver the same amount of energy as we deliver with gasoline. And that has nothing to do with the cost of the energy, just the physical, call them the pumps, tanks, and pipes, trucks that you need to deliver it, the equivalent transformers and wires and distribution systems. It's been totally ignored by analysts. So somehow it's just going to happen. Utilities, you just plug it in.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to use
sure.
I'm going to use your term you used last time. It's not fairy dust. I like that term. And you know what, Mark? That's a beautiful intro for where we're at today. A few weeks ago, you appeared before the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. And by the way, are you like a frequent guest to the Senate? Because I was watching this, and they seem to know you pretty well.
Well, I've testified an embarrassing number of times, so I'm flattered they keep asking me back that I haven't you've been voted off the island yet, but I've testified there frequently before that specific committee, other committees, but that one more than any other committee for inscrutable reasons. But yes, Senator Manchin, when he was in the minority, was very kind to me. He's in the majority, he's kind to me. Senator Murkowski's invited me to testify. Senator Barrasso. And the reason maybe that I've been invited back many times is I hope that I provide important and sometimes provocative perspective. This is what my goal is. But I really do try to stick to the facts that are relevant to their goals, not to attack their goals per se. I may not agree with their goals. And it was before that committee years ago that I raised the minerals challenge, that people were forgetting that each electric car, to remind them what I first said this publicly before that committee, probably 6 years ago. An EV has a battery that weighs about a half a ton. You have to dig up 500,000 pounds of the earth somewhere to get enough minerals to make that one battery. So 250 tons are dug up to make 1/2 ton battery. That has all kinds of environmental, economic, geopolitical, social consequence. But anyway, it's fascinating. I will tell you, if you watched or read that, this was a remarkable hearing. This was the first hearing I've been before where we have a lot of political disagreement. Let's just stipulate the obvious. There was a really remarkable convergence agreement, bipartisan agreement on the core facts of this particular hearing. This was kind of a first. It was really remarkable.
First of all, I happened to watch it, and I've never watched a whole hearing for like 2 hours or so. But I read your look, I got to get out more, I guess.
Nothing else to do.
Yeah, I know, right? But I found it interesting. But I want to just throw a couple of things at you. You had a prepared statement, but I want to go to what Senator John Barrasso said, and I want you to take it from there. And I want to talk more about this because, like EVs a couple of years ago, everyone was thinking, everyone's going to have an EV. And life's going to be great, and this fairy dust was going to keep them moving. And I remember at the time you had a great analogy. You said it's like the government's mandating everyone to buy ice cream, but there aren't enough cows. Now the situation is even worse with electricity. AI, and this is I'm gonna just go through a couple things. I'm gonna read one or two things, and I want your response to them. This hearing. Right, we was talking about data centers, cloud computing, AI, Bitcoin mining. All of these are huge consumers of electricity. And as anyone who lives in a big city knows, and living in New York, during the hot summer months, we have brownouts. You could flip up and this is air conditioning. This is before AI, before anything. And I remember growing up in New York as a kid, there were times where they were telling us you can't put on your air conditioner, or the power was down. And my mother used to tell us, don't open the refrigerator because we're having a brownout back in the day. So our grid system sucks, but hang on to that. I know you have a whole bunch to say on that. But here's what I found so troubling. Not troubling, but I shouldn't say the word troubling. Eye-opening. I never thought in this context, and I think that's what you bring to the table in such an elegant way and a simple way for scientists, is you take complicated things and you make them very simple. Senator John Barrasso said, when he talked about all the needs, that's why you were sitting there, you're sitting with one of the guys from Micron, I believe, also.
Yeah.
And also,
Great company.
AEP, I think, was there also, right?
The American Electric Power Company,
Yeah.
big, second biggest utility, I think, in the United States. Yeah.
So they had all the top guns. And Senator John Barrasso started off with talking about the drivers for electricity, which we just mentioned, the data centers, cloud computing, AI, and all that. And he said, and I quote, "The race for AI with communist China will be more consequential than the space race with the former Soviet Union." And then he added on, "Whoever secures affordable electrical power, China or America, will have a big head start in the race for AI. And right now, America is not positioned well." Now, as an American citizen, that's chilling.
Yeah. Well, it's the right framing. And as you know, we had a back and forth in this issue in the Q&A part, which is how these hearings are structured. You submit testimony, as you know, that's long, but you get to speak for 5 minutes, and they're serious about the 5 minutes, and good on them. So the framing he had is correct. First of all, there's been a lot of hyperbole about AI. And as you know, I've written about AI frequently in my book, which was published just before ChatGPT, the word and the company became public knowledge, has a lot about AI in it. It's not like the technical community has been unaware of the nature, value, and role of AI. It's a big deal. It's a macro trend of substantial portion. And setting aside the hype cycle part, I mean, we can talk about whether NVIDIA is worth what it's worth. And every bubbles that occur because something is fundamental, like the first internet bubble. It wasn't because the internet wasn't a big deal. It's that people got out over their skis on specific companies, specific valuations. But the bubble burst in 2000 didn't mean the internet ended. So I would say the analogy holds today. This is as consequential, AI infusion into the internet, as the advent of the internet. Is just as consequential. And I think we'll have the same characteristic of bubbly, frothy stuff, but it won't change the macro trend in the long run importance. And comparing the space race is kind of interesting because space is a big deal, right? We use satellites. Satellites are extraordinarily important for everything from GPS to Earth imaging to communications. But there's a very narrow set of applications for space. I mean, anybody that's an investor in it knows this. They're expanding. SpaceX is expand, but it's a pretty narrow. Whereas AI is what economists would call a general purpose technology. AI is the equivalent of the invention of the computer because AI isn't computing. It's inference, which the words are different for a reason. So it's a general purpose technology, which means it's applicable to everything. Whereas space is only applicable to a handful of specific applications. It doesn't devalue it. It just means AI is a bigger deal. So we have a race, right, just unequivocally. But AI, like space, AI, like everything, is energy consuming. And certain things are particularly energy consuming. Getting rockets into space takes a lot of energy. And it's actually a pretty good analogy. Running data centers with AI-infused server racks in it uses, just in rough terms, as much energy as launching a satellite. That's the kind of power we're talking about. So gigawatt class power to run single data center campus on the horizon. It's gigawatt class power to launch the Falcon Heavy. That's sort of they're ironically in the same level, except we're building hundreds of data centers and only dozens of rockets. So that's why the energy input matters. And of course, data centers use electricity. So put it in dollar terms, because what I found on energy issues is I learned this the hard way. It's sort of a truism in life, but it was a truism in investing. It was a truism in the legal profession. It's a truism in politics. It turns out it's a truism in the physics of energy. Follow the money. Sort of, you have to express things in dollar terms because dollars represents human time and human effort in a fundamental way everybody understands. So the reason we had this hearing I'll frame it, and I did this in my testimony, in dollar terms. We've discovered we have more electric demand than they forecast. And it's shocking increase in electric demands. I mean, off the chart increases over what anybody expected a couple of years ago. I was the outlier saying for the last decade that the flat electric load growth was an interregnum, not a new normal. And it turns out I was right, but I wasn't right because I'm a...
Hang on. Explain that for someone who graduated 8th grade science class and struggled.
So if you drew a graph of any growth, right, you get things go up and then they go flat, like stock markets, and it's flat. And during those flat periods, what everybody's wondering is stock growth over, electric demand growth over, is the growth in the number of cars over? It's a flat period. Everything goes through cycles. Nothing grows permanently forever. Some things collapse. But the most common phenomenon in everything is you get a growth, and then you get a slow period. The question you'd have in your head, whatever it is, increased use of airplanes, increased use of Uber, or the increased use of oil, increased use of solar, no matter what it is the slower growth a new normal? We finally saturated something. Like demand for food saturates because you can only eat so much. It's easy to break, it just does. So farming as a growth industry saturates as a rapid growth industry. It just goes through a slow growth. So that's the new normal because you can only increase food consumption by population, essentially, which grows slowly. Or is it an interregnum, a brief pause because something different is about to happen? It hasn't happened yet. So oil demand for aircraft took off, no pun intended, from 1920 to 1960.
That's aviation.
A lot of airplanes.
Right? Yeah, more
400.
planes, right.
The dawn of aviation. There were 400 different airplane companies. There was the post office was the first to do airmail, not FedEx. That was the first commercial use of aviation. Was the U.S. Post Office. There wasn't just for military. There were passenger aircraft. The Pan Am Clipper took off. And then it slowed down because the airplanes, in our modern terms, to use a technical word, kind of sucked. I mean, flying to Europe was kind of hard. And then there's an interregnum, a slow growth period, where there wasn't a lot of acceleration in passenger appetite or passenger growth. Then along came the Boeing 707, and I think it was 1957, the first flight. Changed the game. I mean, it just took off. Aviation travel and fuel use for aviation went through the ceiling, right? We went from virtually nothing to, several billion barrels of oil a year now for aviation. Computing is following the same. Computing uses electricity. So if you map the whole electric sector, it's been growing. Then it went flat for the last 2 decades. Everybody said that's a new normal. Modern societies are just hyper efficient. We keep adding efficiency through computers because of all kinds of reasons. And okay, true. But then you add new demands. Electric cars are a new demand. Computing is a new demand, especially at the levels we're doing it. And I would call a new demand the rediscovery that it actually matters to have manufacturing plants in America. Manufacturing matters. So we have this broad bipartisan rush expressed, in my view, the Foolish Chips Act, but whatever. The sentiment is right. We want to bring manufacturing back to America. And now we've rediscovered that manufacturing companies use electricity. If we restored, to give you a pedestrian example, not AI, not EVs, if the United States restored its manufacturing sector to the share of global manufacturing we had 20 years ago, just to the share we had, not take over the world, just the share we had. And we weren't the majority manufacturer 20 years ago. We were a big manufacturer. Mm-hmm. If we restored it to that share, it would increase industrial electricity demand by at least 50%. And everybody wants to restore it to that share, but they weren't thinking about power plants. But put it back to my dollar, put it in dollar terms. So every $1 billion of EVs put on the roads will create a demand for about $20 million of electricity a year. It's not nothing. Because you could do the math. $1 billion is not a lot of cars because we sell about hundreds of billions, right? Every $1 billion of new chip fabs, manufacturing plants, creates about $30 million of electricity demand a year. And we're expecting $100 billion in chip fab investment. So do the math, as I say.
Okay, so let me just stop you 1 second. Let me just stop you because you're getting me scared. You're basically telling me this is recency bias. We project the future from what happened yesterday. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so good. So
yeah,
the big problem back when I was growing up in the 70s in New York, air conditioners. They weren't efficient. So now
Yeah.
we had units that
Yeah.
became more efficient, and everyone thought, okay, now we have a lower level of energy. We're not using as much electricity. And then you have the X factor. You have this game changer, which
The
just
new
takes
stuff.
the new stuff that
Yeah.
just takes
Right.
that chart from a high plateau and sends it into the stratosphere. Then you
It does.
plateau again. Then you go. Now you're telling me more. You're basically telling me here now that forget about the manufacturing just for a moment. Data centers, where when we talk about the cloud, everyone thinks it's something, magic. But it's going into a data center here on Earth that's being placed somewhere, and that's using cooling systems, that's using electricity.
At the calibrate, they're Walmart-sized or shopping mall-sized buildings
Yes.
with no humans in them, filled with megawatts of hot silicon.
Yep.
In physics terms, they're just heaters. I mean, it creates data, but if you're a physicist, it's just a heater. It's a giant building that uses more power than a steel mill to heat up silicon. Yeah, and it uses electricity to heat the silicon. You have to carry the heat away. But yeah, and $1 billion of data centers consumes $60 to $100 million of electricity a year.
Okay, so I listened to some of your testimony. I'm going to throw some numbers at you, and I want you to put these into terms that the non-political scientist, average Joe plumber could understand.
Hey, plumbers make a lot of money these days. Come on.
True. No, that is good. I'm just saying that they know their business.
I know, I get it.
They know their business. Okay. Every $1 billion spent on new chip plants leads to an estimated $300 million in energy, primarily electricity, purchases over a decade. So what we do is you and I, we write our checkbooks and we build this $1 billion, which these plants cost a lot more, right, than $1 billion. They cost a lot of money.
Usually they cost $20 billion, that range.
Okay,
Yeah.
you gave something so the average human could understand. That thing, we just set the clock on an energy consumption appetite. That thing is going to eat up $300 million per billion over a decade. So the more we keep building, okay, that's number one.
Yep.
Number two,
It's locked in.
Locked in. When I was listening to testimony, I was thinking of soon as we do this, and everyone, we break the champagne bottle, and everyone's happy. You just set a fuse on everything else. You just created a long-term liability for the grid system. And where are we getting all this stuff? But okay, I'm going to talk about that in a second. Every $1 billion spent on data centers. So we did chipping. Okay, the chips, got that. Data centers, which is the biggest move now, it's phenomenal. The stock market is loving it. These companies are justifiably, and not like it was in the dot-com, the valuations are not in the stratosphere. And in fact, I would even venture to say many of them are still underestimating what the future is going to be in terms of productivity. Okay, we'll talk more about investing in just a few minutes. But every $1 billion spent on data centers leads to not $300 million, but $600 million, double the amount, in electricity purchases over operating decade. Last year, capital spending on data centers was running about $100 billion a year. So take $600 million. So what the heck are we doing here? Where are we getting this? Where is this infrastructure? Where's this grid system? Where is this fairy dust that's going to fuel this consumption, this amazing thirst for electricity? How are we satisfying them?
Well, at the moment, because they're not built yet. I mean, let's rephrase it. There's a lot of data centers in the world already. The next cycle is under construction. And again, to calibrate it, the quantity of data centers expected to be built in the next 3 years is greater than all the data centers we've built to date in terms of square foot or megawatts, whatever number we want to use. So we're on a tear building this stuff out. The answer is, first, it's going to come from the grid, or you won't build the data centers, or the data center operator will build their own power plants. There's just two places to go. If you're a data center operator, you're petitioning the utility to make sure I can get the power, hope they have enough power on their grid, or you're going to have to build your own power plant. What you're not hearing is data center operators saying that they're going to build solar arrays on the roof of the data center and build piles of batteries
Right. You don't hear
to
that.
run this scale of electric demand that has to be provided 24/7. You're not hearing them say that. They're not backing away from their love of solar and batteries. That's fine. I mean, they can have that. But the rubber meets the road when you need 24/7 power at the megawatt and gigawatt level. So there's an answer. The answer is one fuel source that's usually described in two words. The primary source of energy to supply this demand is going to come from natural gas, not wind turbines, not coal, not nukes. So what it'll come from first is avoiding shutting down the existing nuclear and coal plants. In fact, the utility executive who shared the witness stand with me, so to speak, Mr. Folks, who's the head of AEP, it's very specifically said on the public record, he asked the committee to help him prevent the government from pushing them to shut down their coal plants. Not because he loves coal. This is a utility executive who spent his earlier life shutting down coal plants, but because they need the power. And he's not saying never shut them down. It just says don't push it. We need the power. So the answer to your question is it'll come from not shutting down coal plants, not shutting down nuclear plants, and building a pile load of gas plants. Because what he said, which is I've said for a long time, and it's in the data now, but in his particular service territories, it's especially stark fact, over 95% of all the net new power coming online that's been planned is what he used the word non-dispatchable. And what he said was, we have to have dispatchable power. Now, this is a term of art that utilities use, which is easy to explain. A dispatchable power plant is a power plant that when you ask it to deliver electricity, it delivers the electricity when you ask it for it, not when it's convenient, not when it's sunny,
Right.
not when it's windy, but when you want it. Now, dispatchability has been the sine qua non, the anchor, the only thing that has been built for most of a century in utilities, the utility industry. That's what you build. You build power plants. As long as they're not broken, they run when you ask them to run, because society is sort of cyclical inherently. You can't count on that. You just want the power. So dispatchable is code word for gas turbines. It's not code word for solar plants. And he wasn't saying we should build more batteries. He wasn't saying we shouldn't build them. You go ahead. But when you start doing the arithmetic on the quantity of batteries you would need to match the astonishing magnitude of demand, I mean, if people know what a gigawatt is, I mean, these are city levels of demand for data centers, small city levels of the demand that you have to have continuously and inexpensively. I mean, the companies are rich. They can afford more expensive electricity. So no one was saying, in fact, this was interesting, give me more cheap power. They do want cheap power. They were saying, I need the power.
Period.
And I'm not getting it from what's in the pipeline. And
Right.
this is not an issue, by the way, of a lousy grid. The grid's actually pretty good. It's remarkably good. The problem is the power plants putting the stuff onto the grid have been, for a decade and a half, we've had this fiction that we can operate in this interregnum period with no growth for electric demand. And now new electric demand comes. You can't be shutting down power plants.
So we just grew out of our britches. We just grew out of our
And that's a good thing.
yeah.
I
Don't,
mean, this is economic growth, right? I mean,
no, it's a great thing when there's planning for it. But what there's going to be a pain point. That's the problem, right? The pain point. So now I was listening to the testimony, especially from the gentleman from Micron, where
Yeah.
when I heard that, it's like goes back to 3,000-4,000 years when the Babylonians were building. They became the breadbasket of the world because they were on the Euphrates, shipping, going, water, building railroads in the United States. Access was all based on that transportation. And I heard the guy from Micron say, we're building plants near reliable sources of energy because we can't be down for a nanosecond. That kind of interruption, I don't know what the number was, but it cost them zillions of dollars.
Yeah. So the two plants are building in the United States, as he said in the testimony. One is near a nuclear plant in New York, which means that electricity is being dedicated to the extent it can be to their loads. And one is near the Northwest, near hydro dams, which he didn't say. I'll say it. I'm not blaming him for not saying it. When it's rainy, hydro dams are very reliable. sources of power. When it's not, you have to have something else. That part of the grid has a lot of reliable power because it still has a lot of the old coal plants in the world still running. And by old, I mean the youngest of the old plants that are extraordinarily efficient and cheap. So that's why they're where they are, because they're close to parts of the grid where they don't have to build new transmission, which is difficult and expensive, and where you don't have to guess whether you can get your electricity, and where it has a high level of inherent reliability. And what he was talking about, inherent reliability, of course, is related to both. There's two characteristics. One is this, we'll call it the seasonal reliability. It's always going to be there. The other, or even diurnal reliability, so sun up, sun down. But the spontaneous reliability, that the grid has to deliver power continuously by the fractional second, because if you lose power to a semiconductor fab, you cause millions of dollars a day of damage or more. So he laid out the architecture that everybody knows is true in any manufacturing business, like silicon. Every data center is you need lots of power, it has to be reliable, and then you want it cheap because you use so much of it. The idea that this was going to be solved with wind and solar and batteries, which I've been writing about for years, has been exposed as a fiction. Now, this is an important caveat. It's not the idea that shouldn't be more wind, solar, and batteries on grids. They're supplemental, not a transition.
I remember you said, Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I remember I was reading the transcript, and that's why it jogged my memory. And I think you made a really clear distinction that I think a lot of people got confused. You said there is a difference between aspirational and reality. And I think everyone got caught with the aspirational, and including myself. It was easy to get caught up in that because we want to believe that to be. And it's just
sure.
not so. Cold, dirty, smelly, climate change, all that. Nice, clean electric energy, free. And I think, when you testified and you kept dimensionalizing the amount of the fuse that's lit every time we have this, the new chips, the data centers, the appetite for AI, for the computation, for all of this stuff, now I can understand Senator John Barrasso's point even more. We're falling behind in this race.
Well, we're not behind yet. We're falling behind. There's an important distinction. That's why he was raising the alarm. So go back to where Barrasso was. What he was pointing out was that we are in a technological race, equivalent of the space race. The ascendant technology at that time wasn't just the spaceships for space sake. It was a big deal to be able to put communication satellites and later GPS into orbit. Very consequential, as we all know, because we all use GPS every day. That was less energy intensive than this race. And China has built a huge fleet of coal plants. So most people who study this know this, but a lot of people don't know. So roughly 2/3 of China's electric supply is coal-fired. And they are building a huge fleet of new coal plants, roughly bringing, I think every 2 weeks, they bring a new coal plant online still. And this gives them an astonishing cost advantage going forward. We have a current inherent cost advantage because 70% of our electricity is produced by natural gas and coal, more gas than coal now, which is very inexpensive. We have astonishing capacity to deliver those resources to our power production sector. We have it sounds like I'm being sort of jingoistic and hyperbolic. The United States has the biggest and most efficient capacity to deliver primary energy to its electric sector of any country in the world, full stop. There's no second place. China has to import gas. China even imports coal. We're totally self-sufficient. We export. We're an energy monster. We can deliver functionally an infinite supply of fuel to electric systems. The issue is whether we want to do it. This is not we're running out of stuff. This is not that it's expensive. I mean, natural gas is crazy cheap. It's crazy, and we still produce it by the gigawatt hour. It's crazy, and if you want to fuel these things, if we want to, this is what Barrasso was going to, we'll have to supply the power in the first place, which means the electric sector is being misdirected at the state and federal level. By that I mean it's being directed primarily towards the decarbonization and shrinking, as opposed to directed primarily towards not that you ignore other metrics, but primarily towards adequate supply when the market needs it at a price the market can afford. That should be the prime directive. It used to be the prime directive. What he's saying is if we lose that prime directive, we literally lose the quote, race, not just for AI, but he was using AI, but also for chip factories, for other kinds of factories, because it takes cheap energy. I'll give you a calibration fact that's coal related, because this is really about the energy transition. That's why the hyperbole. It's why we're sort of stuck on stupid, to use that expression, on our energy planning, that somehow solar can do everything. Solar can do a lot. We should have a lot of it. But China made the decision to manufacture the world's solar polysilicon that makes all solar panels. It doesn't matter where they're assembled. You need solar cells. 95% of the silicon to make solar cells made in China on coal-fired grids. So it's no exaggeration to say that when you buy your solar panel for your roof at California, which is where they're popular, you just put solidified Chinese coal on your roof. In fact, I'll give you a number. I did the back of the envelope. It's about 100 tons of Chinese coal was burned to make the solar cells to go onto a single California PV roof at a typical residence. And it's not a theoretical calculation. That's what they burned to make cheap electricity, to fabricate the energy intensive silicon to make the solar cells that are then assembled in, let's say, Indonesia, so they don't look like Chinese panels, maybe even assembled partly by an American-owned company. So we get the illusion and fiction of disconnecting from China, but we're not. So Barrasso was trying to frame that reality with respect to AI and data centers, and he's right. We actually have votes going on. I don't know if the biggest hub for data centers, as you know, is in Virginia. There are votes in 2 of the Virginia counties coming up to ban data center construction. And that's because they're worried that they're going to not be able to, primarily, it's not an aesthetic thing. They're worried about the impact on electric grid there and the ability for the utility to supply the power and still keep everybody else's air conditioning running in the summer. It's a reasonable worry, by the way. It's unreasonable way to affect the solution. The solution is get real, build gas pipelines and gas turbines, because you can build them very quickly.
Okay, hang on one second. Let me just take a step back here. You have tremendous facts on this one. I want to just move back one step before you walk me through a solution. To put this in perspective, and this is what you said, how voracious the energy appetite is for AI. You said these things need to be trained, right? So you have to train the AI to learn. It's a learning process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Call it training.
Yeah. Yeah.
You said, one recent analysis has showed building, not operating, this is just building the AI tool, meaning just building it with training, takes the equivalent of energy used to build an aircraft, not fly it, found that a single modestly small AI application in the training phase consumed more energy than driving a Tesla 300,000 miles.
Yeah, exactly. And there's thousands of applications.
So every time, let me just interrupt you a second rudely, because I just want to get this out. Every time I pick up my iPhone and I hit Chat GPT, what am I doing? Just tell me what I'm doing. You told me what we're doing in California with the solar panels. I got that. Now every time you
push the button, and first thing you're doing is lighting up networks, which everybody forgets about, because wireless looks invisible, it's virtual. Roughly speaking, the networks that keep your phone lit use as much electricity as all the data centers. It's the information superhighway has semi-trailers on it that just happen to be invisible. So there's massive quantities of energy used just to keep the networks lit, to let you push the button to talk to a cloud AI. So when you get that cloud AI to do something for you, it's like when you fly an airplane. You're personally responsible for your pro rata share of the energy was used to make the airplane. That's true. You can keep using the airplane over and over again for a number of years, just like you can use the Chat GPT. But the amount of energy is very large, both to make an aluminum body airplane and to make a an AI engine. It's just that we make a lot more AI engines than we make airplanes. But then you have to run it, like you have to fuel an airplane. So when you tell an AI to do something, the best analogy I can give you is the difference between how you would how Granny would abstemiously drive an automobile to the mall. You know, it uses fuel, but not a lot, and that would be true if Granny were driving, a big SUV with a big engine. AI is the equivalent of a semi-trailer with the pedal of a metal 24/7. I mean, AI just inhales energy because in order to do the inference part, we talk about it in terms of flops per second, teraflop. These are all meaningless things. That's why I put it in sort of Tesla electricity consumption terms, because it just is very intensive to do this inference. Now, that's the state of play. The response of the tech community, which is true, is to say, we're going to make it more efficient. And of course, that's true. They are, they will. But the point is, I made in my testimony was the idea that quote solves the problem of the energy demand really gets it backwards. Because all you have to do is look at the history of computing to know you can predict the future from the past, in this case, with dead certainty. And I use the analogy, as you know, but I'll use it again because I don't want to force everybody to go read the testimony and listen to an hour of blather with senators. If we've made computing efficiency roughly a billionfold more efficient over the last 40, 50 years. There's nothing else in human history where we've improved the energy efficiency so much. Or put it in this terms, your iPhone, if it operated at the energy efficiency of a 1980 computer, would use the electricity of a skyscraper. Well, that would mean there would be no iPhones. Instead, the efficiency gains mean that there are billions of iPhones using collectively the electric appetite of a country. So AI today is an energy hog, and they're saying they're going to make it more efficient. In fact, the latest NVIDIA chip measured the metrics they use, is total inferences per watt hour, how fast they can do and use less energy. It's 30 times better. Intel just released a chip that's 50 times better. 50 times better. So solves a problem. Micron pointed out that their chips are better. Their memory chips for AI are better. Well, that's true. But what happens in computing is that the demand for the bits accelerates faster than the efficiency because the efficiency is what allows the demand to happen in the first place. The same thing as with smartphones, obviously. Obviously, so we're going to do it again.
What I find so amazing, and this is a throwback to the 1950s. A couple of years ago, I finished reading the Power Broker about Robert Moses, who built New York.
Yeah.
It's called The Rise and Fall of Robert Moses. And he loved highways, continually built highways. Didn't want to spend any money on mass transit. And today in New York, as you probably know, the JFK doesn't have a direct subway that runs to it. It could have been fractions of a penny to do it, but he chose not to connect parts of Queens and this because he wanted highways. Anytime there was too much congestion, build more highways.
Build a highway.
No one thought that more highways breed more cars, more highways. You get on this treadmill that does not stop. So I totally get when you said
there's a difference. This is what I think that's remarkable. It's again, I'm pimping up my book here. There's something different now. When people say this time it's different, this is a red flag, right? There is one thing that's different phenomenologically, and it's this. You're right. You get on a treadmill, but the treadmill ends for highways and for cars. It already has in America in this sense. People don't want to spend more hours in a car than they do. We've already seen that. So the principal vector in the automobile industry is to more toy cars, multi-car families with cars for different, entertainment, the weekend, off-road, your sports car. But the absolute number of miles driven per person per year has basically been flat for 20, 30 years because people don't want to spend more time in a car. And as highways get better, they move to the exurbs, but they still spend the same number of hours. They just drive a little faster, a few more highways. But there's a plateau. And this is true for every product in human history. Aviation travel, you just got to know where you are on the curve before it plateaus. Everything plateaus. So far, with data, there's no reason to think there's a limit. because there's nothing about which we don't want to know more information or have more granular information or more, whether it's for safety, whether it's for discovery, whether it's to measure our body's dynamics, for health reasons. There's an infinite demand for information, and as you decrease the energy cost and the dollar cost per unit of acquisition, you feed an infinite demand. Right. There's not an infinite demand for how many hours I want to be on the road, how many hours I spend on an airplane, how much food I can eat. All of it saturates it on wealth effects and human time effects. It's a crazy, crazy market, and the first evidence of that, because the 30 years we've been in, it's a growth phase for data centers, equivalent of the auto age from mid-1920s to the 1960s. And then the growth of automobiles since then has been much slower because everybody got a car. Phase one of the data era has everybody sort of kindled around the analogy you made about cars. But this is why it is a different phenomenology. The first hint of that is what's going on now with AI. It's the first hint that we can, I won't say forever, but for the foreseeable future, dozens and dozens of years, probably centuries, keep finding new clever ways to manipulate information and data to find new uses for what compute can do. And we'll keep making it less and less energy intensive to do that. And we'll just keep feeding the beast because it's the biggest secular shift in a structure for society since the Industrial Revolution. And we're in the second inning of this. This is not the ninth inning. And it will have, I think it'll have consequential impact. It will, back to Barrasso, the winner in this race is not just a winner for military reasons. The military part obviously matters. It really is a measure of, quote, economic dominance, because this is the epicenter of growth. Silicon Valley's right. I mean, they're full of hyperbole in Silicon Valley because that's the nature of the beast. But they're in fact right. You may not be right about the value of the company, but they're right about the fact that they're sitting at this pivot in history, creating things that are truly remarkable, but they all require lots of electricity.
So let me put this in my terms for just a moment, simple terms for me. Everything you mentioned, other than what we're at now with information, there was a speed limit. There was an end. There was an end game.
Yeah.
There was a point of saturation. I wouldn't say saturation, but how many more miles can you drive? How much more food can you eat? It's going to be incremental, not huge.
Exactly.
Leaps.
Right.
Since we're human beings and our curiosity grows exponentially, the more we know, the more we want to know 50 other things, then 100 other things, we will, fair to say, unless we change our biological makeup and our brain masses change or whatever, we will continue to have this amazing, we'll never quench the thirst for knowledge and curiosity, which even though the price of the efficiency, rather, of all of these mechanisms, these chips, data centers, will get lower, because as you mentioned, I think you said something, a single smartphone in 1980, same energy efficiency today would be a Manhattan office building, right? So we're going to get better. We're going to get better. We're going to get more efficient.
A lot better.
A lot better. Enormous. I think, just a billionfold. I don't, just think of that as mind-boggling. But on the other side is we're going to just keep exponentially growing our level of curiosity to do more and more and more and more. And the end game could be, I can't even say centuries, because we've always, humans have always asked why. We're the only creature that can continually ask why.
So the domain, and again, I have a lot of my book about that specific issue, is it's really interesting to look at the information features of curiosity, about discovery, because the most exotic aspect of just curiosity would be astronomy. I wanted to be an astronomer, an astrophysicist when I went to school. And then I discovered there weren't jobs for them. So I focused on just theoretical physics. I got a job as an engineer in semiconductors because I couldn't get a job as a physicist initially. But I love astronomy. Astronomy is pure curiosity. I mean, there's no utility function really. Yeah, for navigating by stars, but that's not astronomy. That's just navigation. The early astrolabes. So when you look at that domain and you look at the data appetites and the quantity of data generated and the the new algorithms and new modalities to handle the level of data. They're actually the pioneers of a lot of the stuff that goes into our data management systems or happening in science and even astronomy. But I'll take it beyond the curiosity part. We have an infinite capacity to want to understand, not to be curious about nature, because nature is always preying on us. As I wrote in my book, nature's been trying to kill humans forever. And if you want to minimize our ability to be abused by nature, you need to understand it before you can build resilience, or if you pretend you can control. Can't control nature, but you can be more resilient, but you have to understand it. So weather forecasting, incredibly complex and hard. Not climate forecasting, weather forecasting. We want to understand our own body, right? The health issue. We want to talk about a complicated machine. So this is not about just curiosity. A lot of research scientists are curious about how cells work and how viruses work. But the end game is not just curiosity, is it? It would be really nice if we could have more personal visibility for our own personal genome, our own personal biome, our own personal behaviors. If you had an AI-infused intelligent agent that was trained specifically on the data about your body, which is where AI is going, hyper-specificity, but your AI engine is only trained on your biological data that you are collecting daily. You're not doing it now. We know the centers are emerging to make it possible to collect as much data about your body each day as the United States collects on everything else combined daily. That's not a crazy idea or aspiration because of the trajectory of information systems. You train AI on that, which if I made it hyper energy efficient, then I can make it affordable, which is what will happen, that every single human being will have an AI bio agent in the cloud, like their smartphone. Everybody would have one. And if each one of those things use the electricity appetite of a steel mill, you would care less because of the benefits it would get you. But you'd sure want it not to be expensive. And the way it gets cheap is not just that the technology is cheap, because it will require electric appetites of a small steel mill to do what I described. But who cares if gas is cheap and turbines are run well and there's lots of solar to fill in? But it's not just about curiosity. It's about the whole feature of our environment, our built environments, supply chains. Every business guy will tell you they'd like to have more information transparency, which means a lot more data, that's actionable, which means they don't have to run a spreadsheet. Again, a hyper-specific trained AI on only the data of only your company's supply chain doesn't go rogue, doesn't hallucinate. It will actually answer semantic language questions, which is sort of the holy grail of the industrial AI industry, is to create tools for specific industries, not just healthcare, but manufacturers, transportation systems. But if you step back and you just added up the data demands for all this, the numbers are absolutely insane. And so back to my point, there's no visible limit to the demand for that. If you can make it affordable, we could stipulate that nobody has to be a semiconductor engineer, which I was once in my life, to know the truth that the trajectory of technologies in that domain is wicked down, right? Just collapses. That's what these people do. That's what they live to do, is to collapse the cost of these things, which again proliferates their use and increases the need for electricity. That's the epiphany that Barrasso was pointing out. That's the race we're in. And, it's the one issue, unlike, I would say, maybe the second issue. The car issue, which is why I picked cars and EVs, is a way to illustrate why the energy transition dreams are silly. They collide on something that matters to people. Personal transportation matters to people. I mean, the car was a revolutionary freedom engine, an economic engine, one of the biggest, most important economic inventions of history. So messing with that market's consequential, which is that we're now discovering. Tinkering with that market is really high consequence, and people don't like it. If you make their life inconvenient through their car. The same thing is now happening with compute. We've become a compute-dependent society. I'm stating the obvious. All of us, not just our kids, all of us become very casually dependent on an astonishing infrastructure that now we're discovering, just like cars, uses lots of energy.
Yeah.
It has to be reliable.
I loved watches. I used to collect pocket watches, and I have a couple of nice watches. But my Apple Watch, with the amount of information it gives me, You know, if you told, you know, what we would have needed 20 years ago to count number of steps, heart rate, oxygen level, activity,
Yeah,
it's just staggering. And this is just in the early innings.
yeah,
So I
exactly.
totally, totally get what you're saying. And just in the few minutes we have left, I could speak to you for hours. Is this, what inning do you think we're in AI, in the compute, in the I can't even say the whole AI, but where are we now in 2024 with AI? What inning?
So the general AI infrastructure is sitting in computer terms, which is the best analogy to use, roughly when in PC terms would be a good way
Hmm.
to AI is AI is a different class of computing, much as the PC was a different class of computing when it was introduced. We'd had computing in 1984 already for 3 decades, and it was a big deal. Everybody knew it was a big deal. Computer was a big deal. But the introduction of the Mac, let's say, we'll do 1984. So it's a perfect anniversary. We're on the anniversary of the introduction of a Mac,
So,
right?
40 years ago, right? So, okay, guys.
We're at the equivalent of the introduction of a Mac in
Wow.
AI.
Wow. So
That's where we are.
just to put that in perspective, computers weren't so. Not everyone had a computer back in the day. I remember I didn't get a computer
I
for
did.
my house. Okay, a PC until
Yeah.
the early '90s in my house. You
Yeah.
know, so where we set it up in the kitchen. You know, it was a big deal. There were laptops, but the laptops were huge, and it was business related. But
There were laps. There were elephant laps,
yeah,
but
I
it's okay.
remember our accountant used to come with a portable computer. It was on one of the baggage, one of those
Yeah.
dollies they had.
Yeah.
But just to put this in perspective, in my lifetime, my kids' lifetime, only three of them, they grew up without having a computer in the
Right.
house for entertainment, and
Right.
that's so you're telling me that's where we are with AI. We're way
Yeah.
before that. We're 84. We're
For
1984.
1984.
Okay, that's number one. Number two, where are we with
Yeah.
the growth of data? I know this is a tough one, but where are we in the growth of data?
I mean,
How do you measure that?
so well, we know there's only one way you can measure it that has salience, and it's not in dollars because you know why. Every incremental dollar spent on aluminum buys you roughly the same amount of aluminum as you got with the last
Right,
dollar, give
right,
or
right,
take. Come on.
right.
Every incremental dollar you spend on silicon, you're getting two
Exponential.
to 10 times more value.
Yeah.
So if I can't measure it in dollar terms. So the only unit we use are bytes. We track, roughly speaking, how much data is created and churned. But just the bytes. And the measure that we use now is zettabytes. And that's a number that has no meaning to anybody. It's a zettabyte era. But people know what a terabyte is, a trillion bytes. And then you go from, tera, you go to petabytes and exabytes. Each is 1,000. Then the zettabytes. And zetta is a crazy number. I mean, if I had a zetta stack of dollar bills, the bills would go to the sun and back, which is 93 million miles away, 700 times. So a zetta is a big number. So even though a tiny amount of energy is used per byte, numbers are big. Now, to answer your question, having framed, we're in the zettabyte era. The international units, bureaucrats, last year announced the creation of new big numbers, names for big numbers, because after the zettabyte, the last named big number was a yottabyte, yotta, 1,000, and we have that number because we'll soon be in a yottabyte era, which is 100 times bigger than the era we're in. It's 1,000 times bigger number, but you have to prepare for the prospect of a bigger one. So they created a new bigger. This gives you the answer to the question is we have so much data being generated and flowed and processed that we're having to create new names for numbers. And the new name, by the way, is a really annoying name. All of the data scientists were petitioning to have the name after yottabyte be brontobyte, after the brontosaurus, because they thought it would sound cute. Of course, the bureaucrats who have no sense of humor didn't do that. They call it a ronobyte. So it's the Greek.
Crazy.
Doesn't matter.
I'm looking here, just to the enormity of this, where you can't even get your head around this. A megabyte is a million. Then you have the giga, tera. Each one
Gig is a billion.
exponentially be 10 times, right? Then you have the
1,000 times per
1,000, right? You have a
Then you
million,
go
right?
gigabyte, terabyte,
Peta,
and petabyte, which is exabyte.
and
So we're now making exabyte.
then with zettabyte,
zettabyte,
and yottabyte.
yottabyte, then rottabyte.
Okay, before we get to rottabyte,
We're
yottabyte.
going to be in the yottabyte era within the next, before the 2030s hit, we'll be in a yottabyte era.
Okay, so in the yottabyte era, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
10 to the 26.
24 zeros after
Yeah.
the number 1. A zetta is
21
21,
zeros.
right? So it's
But
the proportion is just, it continues to just
right. The numbers they don't. That's why
Can't even
you
use
try to
words.
think of what other numbers mean. The numbers
they
have
mean nothing.
they're too big. In fact, the weight of all the atoms in the Earth's atmosphere you can measure in zettagrams. I mean, to give you an idea how big a zetta is, it's just a crazy big number. So the trajectory is
Amazing.
no one disputes that we're moving from zettabytes to a yottabyte era. So 1,000-fold increase in data traffic to avoid 1,000-fold increase in electricity consumption, which is not sustainable. Let's say to get only a 50% increase in electricity consumption, which would be crazy. But for the whole, you do the math here. You're going to have at least a 500-fold increase in an energy efficiency of the systems within the next 7 years. We'll probably get 200 or 300-fold increase within the next 10 years on the systems, but and if we do that, we'll just accelerate the yottabyte era. It's a loop that we're not going to break.
It's amazing.
And it's a virtuous loop. I mean, this is not consumption for the sake of consumption. I come back to the reason Senator Barrasso has pointed this out, is it gives you economic advantage and as well as military advantage. It gives you economic and business advantage because the market is not buying compute because it's a luxury. I mean, markets aren't stupid. This astronomical increase in data consumption is because markets are choosing to consume it for a reason. Consumers are consuming it sometimes just for entertainment, for fun, watching movies. That's fine. Video games,
or for health. There are real.
But yeah, it's for health. It's for manufacturing. So the consumption is there's no schemer trying to convince people to consume data, right? It's purely a market-driven phenomenon.
Yeah, it's absolutely staggering. Last thing for you, Mark, because you see the future clearer than any prophet I know. Who's going to be give me some public companies, give me 2 or 3 public companies that are going to be riding this mega trend in the first inning right now. Who would you say is the 2 or 3 companies?
So the question comes back to NVIDIA frequently. Does NVIDIA have moats? Does NVIDIA have enough demand? And I think NVIDIA has enough moats to be good for a while. Intel had a lot of moats for a long time.
Yeah. Before
people broke down their moats by competing with them. NVIDIA has some real technological moats, but they're not permanent moats. So the demand is there for what they're doing, but there's a lot of competition because they recognize the demand. I don't know how long their moat lasts. I don't think the moat could be broken in a year or two. So I'm not predicting, any kind of market collapse. This is your expertise. Will drag everything down. So if we get a recession, people lose enthusiasm. It doesn't matter what the inherent value is of a company. Stock's going to go down. We know that.
Forget about the stock price because the stock price is going to match the underlying worth of the business. So if we're talking,
it doesn't matter.
We're talking. Let's start from this. We're talking yottabytes a year.
So here's what you do.
Go ahead.
Short term, long term. You look at the 3 buckets. The guys who make the front end stuff, the NVIDIAs, the Intels. I love Intel. Intel's got a great new chip, which is super efficient for the end use AI in your phone, AI in your laptop. NVIDIA has been focusing on AI in the data center. Both markets are explosive. So I'm semiconductors remain stipulating, not picking valuations. They remain a growth industry. We're an early era of semis. Semis are going to keep booming. We'll oversupply, we'll undersupply, but they're going to keep booming. So front end semis and sensors. Sensors are tough, but sensors are hard to figure out how to invest in. But you get data from sensors that are cameras, infrared sensors, chemical sensors, radars, LiDAR. All these things are in the sensor class because you need data. So the front end, the silicon, all the big deal. In the middle, you have the infrastructure, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the Googles, I mean, I'm an Amazon bull. I remain an Amazon bull. Setting aside the politics, whether they want to break up the beasts and all this stuff, as big as our infrastructure is, it ain't big enough.
Mm.
This is not like the interstate highway system circa 2024, where you don't need that many more highways. This is the highway system circa 1984, 1924.
I would think right before the national highway system came in, we
Yeah,
have these
that's
little
where we are.
tributaries, and we're not even there.
We're going to keep building the highways and infrastructure. It's to use that expression, it's a mega trend. The physical infrastructure players, these are the data center REITs, the Dupont Fabros, the Equinixes. I mean, all these guys that are not just the data centers operated by the Amazons of the world, but what are called the colos, the co-location data centers, the people that own or operate the equivalent of the malls, right? You can be a Saks Fifth Avenue, or you can be a shopping mall where all the stores are. The data center REITs that let all the stores come in, bull case from my perspective. I don't know which one's the right one. I like a lot of them. So that infrastructure gets built, has to be built. And then around that, the operators, they have to have the stuff that makes it possible to build the systems in the first place. But I don't mean the chips, I mean the power systems. So the companies that make power conditioning, power control, power switching, power reliability, because these things are beasts. They're steel mill or town-sized electricity consumption, 24/7 at reliability levels that are unprecedented. Give you an analogy, a data center has an energy demand roughly equal to a jumbo jet today. So a jumbo jet today is roughly 100 megawatts of power. That's what those two engines are, 50 megawatts each. Common data center today is now 100 megawatts of power. But here's the difference. The data center it's like the airplane that can never land for maintenance. It has to run 20.
Oh, right. It is always right. It's never down.
So so your companies are like Eaton, Vertiv, Johnson Controls, Honeywell, all these guys. A lot of their businesses are more and more focused on data center power. Schneider Electric,
Right.
They're a beast in this. Emerson, beast. Rockwell, beast. And their largest single new market. Now, it's not their biggest market for many of them. For Vertiv it is, but for many of them, it's not their biggest market, but the largest single growth vector for them. And finally, upstream of that, you say, how are we going to get the power to these damn things?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that well, we'll give the political get out of jail card answer plus the actual solution, but they're both relevant for investors. The politically get out of jail card are investors in nuclear, because all the data center guys and the tech guys are throwing money at fission because they want to build small reactors to run their data centers on. I'm a huge cheerleader. This is great. You can't buy one today. I mean, you could order one in principle. It's paper. You can't buy one. You got to build them first, run them, test them, validate them, build the capacity to build them. It'll take a decade. But the enthusiasm for it is going to drive equities in nuclear companies, nuclear operators, nuclear refiners, upstream mining.
Give me someone.
Well, I happen to like the Altman SPAC, even though it's a SPAC, Oklo, okay, LO. It's a very clever design. They're now public. Most of the new designs are not public companies. So because this was a SPAC, you can bet with alongside Altman on a radically new design. But I mean, if you're looking for a binary choice, right? It'll either work or it won't work. It'll be worth a lot or it'll be worth nothing. I don't know. I think it'll be worth something.
No.
So Cameco is the company, its predecessor I worked for as a kid in Canada. Eldorado was called Eldorado Nuclear then. They're the big uranium miner in North America. We're going to be reshoring all this supply chain in the next decade. So stock's already up, but this is a bull case for uranium. Babcock and Wilcox is one of the oldest industrial companies in the United States. It goes back to the mid 1800s. The steam boilers. They're the guys that make the nuclear fuel, and they're going to have to expand. I like them a lot because they got nowhere to go but to build more of this stuff. But so there'll be a lot of excitement around nukes because first of all we kill the nuclear industry. The nuclears that got killed by an orchestrated campaign of extreme environmentalists. I know because I was debating them when it was going on. I was at the accident at 3 Mile Island for the week of the accident and spent the next 8 years, 9 years of my life debating the anti-nuke kooks and their kooks. And I don't mean that they don't have, some people have concerns. I'm talking about the kooks. And I hate to use, invective language, but they really are kooky. Acting like reactors can explode like nuclear bombs, saying it overtly is irresponsible and also impossible in the physics of reactors. They can't do that. But anyway, I got a new piece coming out on nuclear. I'll send you when it comes out. I haven't written about nuclear for decades because there's been no revival. It's going to be here. There's a lot of places to play it. I don't think it's going to go away, even though we can't order many reactors right away, because it's just too damn important. And so that's great. But what's going to fuel what's going to fuel the data centers and the chip factories in the next 5-10 years? Natural gas turbines. So what you want to do is look at who makes gas turbines, who makes diesel generator. By diesel, I mean diesel engine class, not with diesel fuel. Detroit Diesel, private company, unfortunately. Jenbacher, you can't invest in it. It's tied up in GE. Solar Turbines, great company. It's tied up in Caterpillar. It's quite possible Caterpillar's turbine and engine business will be worth more than its truck business.
They might spin that out one day,
And natural gas, gas compression, gas pipelines. I'll tell you, I will say this fact, which is not me saying it, but I think it's right, because I was looking at a couple of my favorite analysts, looking at the gas demands coming from data centers. The feeding data centers the electricity they need, which will come from natural gas going into gas turbines, represents the largest single increment in net new gas demand in U.S. history. So you'd look at that and say, well, where do I want to play? Well, okay, some of the gas producers will probably do fine. The midstream guys that move the gas around, the compression guys that compress the gas. It's going to, there'll be we'll call them digital companies in that food chain too, who'll do the management, the monitoring, the services, the service companies.
You go on and on. The ecosystem is just amazing.
It's like a penumbra of, and it's the interesting thing is the demand will drive industrial resurgence that the United States is capable, if the regulators don't stop it,
right,
from booming. But we have a regulatory system that throws a lot of sand in the gears. And so we need to have a bipartisan decision that the kind of industrial expansion that's required. And I include more wind and batteries. We need more mines here and more batteries. This is great. But none of them will happen without reforms in our environmental industrial class regulations. We need to do this.
That's where we need
overdue.
That's where we need guys like you.
And then you want to see a boom. I mean, if we did that, if the United States Congress on a bipartisan basis passed a comprehensive reform bill to facilitate industrial expansion of critical energy infrastructure and permitting for things like factories and data centers and transmission lines, if we just said, we need a reset. Nobody disagrees that we should have regulations. It's just the regulations are locked into a half century to a century old mindset. Let's stay with the philosophy, that clean and efficient, safe, all matters, but do a reset for efficiency in the 21st century. If we actually did that, you first, not only would it light up the investment sphere and stocks across the landscape, but it would light up foreign direct investment in the United States. The flood of capital that would come here would be like a tsunami, because where else would you, if you're in China, Japan, South Korea, or anywhere in the East Bloc, and you have money to invest, all the sovereign wealth funds, they know that we would deliver. We could deliver. It's not like we've forgotten how to build stuff. Is that we've forgotten that it matters.
So we got to make sure the sand doesn't get in the gear, and that's why guys like you have to get before the Senate and educate these politicians on making legislation that doesn't limit technology and growth. That comes down to that.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It does.
Ladies and gentlemen, the amazing Mark Mills. Every time I listen to him, I just walk away so much smarter, and so will you, and hopefully richer now that he gave us a whole bunch of whole ecosystem there. But Mark, I can't thank you enough, and keep doing the great work that you're doing, and taking the complex science and physics behind this and making it palpable, and hopefully the people in Washington will one day hopefully very soon listen and get their house in order, because if not, the consequences are too great for all of us.
I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to get our house in order. I don't mean that politics are going to calm down. We're going to hug and get along, but there are a lot of hints of bipartisan reconvergence on things that really matter. So I'm
Yeah.
cautiously optimistic. I'm a Canadian, as you know. I immigrated, became an
Yep.
American, so
Yep.
I volunteered to be here and join this great enterprise known as the United States. And I think we got a lot of juice left. So,
We
and
put it.
what you're doing is important to get the word out, get people excited and thinking, and private investment. This is the engine of America. I mean, I
Yep.
learned this a long time ago. The engine, our advantage over so many other countries is not that we're inherently smarter than everybody else. Lots of smart people everywhere. Is our capital system
Works.
allows crazy risk taking that nobody else can do. We don't need central planning. We got where we are because of Americans are, crazy risk takers, for better or for worse. But it's surely animated our our economy, and keeping that alive. That's the golden goose. Private investors, private equity investors, individuals, not the government. The government doesn't invest. They take my money
Mark,
and pick winners and losers.
all I can say to you is that out of the top 10 companies in the world, the largest companies,
Yeah,
8 of them are US based.
yeah, yeah,
And Microsoft was started in a garage. NVIDIA was started at Denny's on a paper napkin.
yeah,
Apple was
yeah,
started in a garage. Alphabet was started in another garage. Amazon was started, Jeff Bezos's basement, garage,
yeah.
whatever. Facebook in a dorm room. Berkshire Hathaway out of a spare bedroom in Warren Buffett's house. And, it works. The system works.
That list. Maybe you're looking at the same list. 1984.
Oh,
The ten most valuable companies and then 19 and 2024 10 most valuable companies. On that list, 8 out of 10 of the most valuable companies in 1984 were energy producers. In 2024, 9 out of 10 are energy users. Not because energy is not important, because the trajectory for growth now, the new thing is our energy consuming things from pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are as energy intensive, by the way, as silicon. It's really energy intensive business, unsurprisingly,
yep, yep,
perhaps.
yep, yep, yep.
And so that's why Barroso said what he said. If you know that's where the growth is.
Yep,
You got to make sure you have the energy.
that's right. 1984. I just thought about this and then looked it up, and I was trying to guess a few of them. But ExxonMobil was the largest company. General Motors, Mobil,
Yeah,
Ford Motor, IBM, Texaco, DuPont, Amoco, Chevron, Texaco. Then you have
so
General Electric, then Gulf Oil, then Atlantic Richfield, then Shell Oil, then
yeah.
Occidental Petroleum. Then that's it. It's
And,
just the
and here's
game.
the key. Every one of those, to your earlier question, every one of those companies is a bigger company today, or they consolidated and became bigger. They're all
Yes.
bigger, they're all profitable, but they're not the most valuable by stock market
No.
valuation because they're mature. They're on that that slow growth slope.
They hit the speed limit.
Yeah,
How many
but
hamburgers can you eat? That's what we
yeah,
did.
but do they matter? But do they? Yeah, they matter. It's like saying, does food matter? Yeah, apparently it does. I mean, people have to eat. I mean, we consume energy biologically. Machines, our society consumes energy in the other phenomenology. So this is the category error that a lot of investors make, is that somehow they don't matter. But, only thing I would say about those companies, as a share of the S&P, they're at a record low still, the energy companies collectively. So you'd have to ask yourself, are they back to an investment question? Is that a permanent condition? I mean, is it really that energy as a share of GDP, they're talking about equity share, of the S&P rather, is a permanent, or is there sort of a long run normal for the share of the S&P where energy belongs? It looks like a long run normal is, call it 6 to 10%, but it's at 3%. So
that comes in and out depending on a whole bunch of factors and circumstances.
yeah,
It's like oxygen. You don't think about it till you need it. And energy
yeah,
was left for dead a few years ago, and all of a sudden, Ukraine happens and Russia, all of a sudden, energy is all everyone's thinking about.
Who knew? Who knew?
Who knew,
Well,
right? Yeah.
I give you one last fact set since we've converged back to where Barassel started. Energy and chips, energy and AI, because that's the convergence he was talking about. And since people think we're in an energy transition, the fact that, I've talked to you about this before. So about 82% of all the, if you measure it in that way, primary energy comes from hydrocarbons, oil, gas, and coal. And solar and wind combined globally supply about 4% of the world's energy. Burning wood provides 9%. Burning wood globally is still more important than wind and solar. But here's the most important point. 100% of all human activities, not some, 100% depend on hydrocarbons.
Yep.
There is nothing that you do. There's no machine that you own, operate. There's no industry that isn't somewhere in a supply chain dependent utterly critically on hydrocarbons. It's as important to a modern civilization as food is to a human being or water. It's not an option. We're not going to transition away from it. We'll find better ways to use it, cleaner ways to use it. And the only issues will be, what do we pay for it? Who supplies it? And if it's me, I want us supplying it, and I want it cheap. And I want it to fuel AI, and I want those engines to light up our discovery, make healthcare better. But we'll go through these sort of cycles of
I was just going to say, it's like the ocean. It ebb and flows, and everything old is new again, and it's going to have its cycle. And bottom line, since we were in caves building fire to keep warm and to keep the monsters away, we need energy. There's no question about that. The same way we need oxygen. And it's just going to fluctuate with market sentiment. Right. But eventually, at the end of the day, try living without electricity for an afternoon and see how that works for you.
Good luck. But thank you again. Sort of drag you down a rat hole again.
Oh, no, I love it. I love it. Mark, thanks so much for being on the show. And folks, the name of the book, let me just get the exact name, and I'll put a link down here. Mark, this was your book that you wrote in, what was it, early?
End of 21. Yeah, published really a 2022 book, but came out just before Christmas. Yeah,
right. We talked about this book on the last show, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the Cloud Revolution.
Yes, folks, it's called the Cloud Revolution. It was November 2021. The Cloud Revolution: How the Convergence of New Technologies Will Unleash the Next Economic Boom and a Roaring 2020s. And so far, the book is prophetic. Really outstanding. Mark, thanks again for being on the show. Greatly, greatly appreciate it. We'll be in touch.
Great to be on. Thanks again. We'll do it next May.
Next May, yeah. Thanks so much, Mark. Take care, pal.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. If you love the show or disagree with it, shoot us feedback. Please review us on iTunes and subscribe to the show anywhere good podcasts are found. This is Charles Mizrahi for The Charles Mizrahi Show. Thanks for listening.